Commander Zekthara adjusted the climate control on his environmental suit as the transport shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere. The Vorthan military attaché had seen countless worlds during his 40 cycles of service, but this blue-green planet still managed to unsettle him. Perhaps it was the chaotic swirl of weather patterns, or the violent tectonic activity the humans seemed to ignore completely. Most likely, it was the knowledge that this seemingly peaceful world had spawned the most terrifying military force the galaxy had ever encountered. The shuttle touched down at the Human Military Academy with barely a whisper, the pilot's skill evident in the smooth landing. Through the viewport, Zekthara observed the sprawling complex of buildings that stretched across several kilometers. Unlike the towering spires and crystalline structures favored by most civilized species, human architecture appeared almost primitive, angular concrete, and steel rising from carefully manicured grounds. Yet there was something deliberately intimidating about the stark functionality of it all. Commander Zekthara, a human voice, drew his attention. Standing at the shuttle's entrance was a tall female in a crisp military uniform, her bearing rigid with discipline. "I'm Colonel Sarah Martinez, your assigned liaison for the tour. Welcome to Terra Nova Military Academy." Zekthara's translator automatically converted her words into familiar Vorthan concepts, though some nuances were lost. He stepped carefully onto the tarmac, his forelegs finding purchase on the strange human concrete. "Colonel Martinez, I appreciate the Terran Federation's willingness to allow this inspection." The colonel's expression remained neutral, though Zekthara detected micro-movements in her facial muscles that suggested controlled emotion. Humans were remarkably expressive creatures, their feelings often visible to those who knew how to read their biological tells. The Academy Board felt it was time our galactic allies understood how we train our officers. "Shall we begin?" As they walked across the parade ground, Zekthara noted the precise formations of cadets moving between buildings. Each group moved with a synchronization that would have impressed even Vorthan military instructors. But there was something distinctly human about their gait, a predatory confidence that made his auxiliary hearts flutter nervously. These were young humans, barely past their species' adolescence, yet they carried themselves like seasoned warriors. "How many cadets are currently enrolled?" Zekthara asked, his voice modulator translating the question into human speech patterns. "Currently, we have approximately 8,000 cadets across all 4 years," Martinez replied. "Each one represents the top 1% of applicants from across the Federation. The selection process is intensive." They entered the main administrative building, where holographic displays showed star charts and tactical scenarios. Zekthara recognized several systems, including his own homeworld of Vorthak, marked with various strategic notations. The casual way humans had cataloged potential battlefields across known space sent a chill through his exoskeleton. The Academy was founded 200 Earth years ago, Martinez continued as they walked through corridors lined with portraits of distinguished graduates. Initially, it focused on traditional military doctrine adapted from our pre-space conflicts. However, as we encountered other species and learned about galactic warfare, our curriculum evolved. Zekthara paused before a portrait of Admiral Chen Weilin, the human who had single-handedly ended the Corvin uprising by strategically deploying antimatter charges around the system's primary star. The Corvins had surrendered within hours, realizing that humans were genuinely prepared to commit stellar genocide to achieve their objectives. "Your species' approach to conflict resolution is unique. We prefer to think of it as comprehensive," Martinez said with what Zekthara was learning to recognize as a human smile, an expression that could convey anything from genuine pleasure to predatory intent. "Would you like to observe some classes in session?" Their first stop was a lecture hall, where approximately 200 first-year cadets sat in tiered seating. Their attention focused on a holographic display showing the Battle of Kepler, 442. The instructor, a graying human with cybernetic implants replacing his left arm and eye, was dissecting the tactical decisions that led to humanity's victory over a Centauri Republic fleet twice their size. The Centauri admiral made a classic error in assuming human behavioral patterns would follow established galactic norms, the instructor explained, highlighting fleet movements on the display. He expected us to retreat when faced with overwhelming odds, as any rational species would. Instead, Admiral Thompson ordered his ships to ram the enemy flagship while simultaneously deploying nuclear mines throughout the system. A cadet raised her hand. "Professor, wasn't that action technically a war crime under galactic law?" The professor's expression hardened. "Cadet Reynolds, what is the first principle of human military doctrine?" "Victory at any cost, sir. The survival of humanity supersedes all other considerations." "Correct. The Centauri were planning to glass Earth's colonies and sell our survivors into slavery. Admiral Thompson's war crime saved approximately 2 billion human lives. Sometimes the choice is between being moral and being alive. We choose life." Zekharov felt his primary stomach clench. The casual way these young humans discussed genocide and nuclear warfare was profoundly disturbing. In Vorthan military academies, such extreme measures were theoretical exercises studied only to understand enemy capabilities. Here, they were presented as viable tactical options. The next classroom featured advanced xenobiology, where cadets were learning to identify weak points in various alien physiologies. Zekharov watched in growing horror as the instructor demonstrated pressure points on a holographic Vorthan anatomy display, his own species anatomy. The human pointed out exactly where to strike to paralyze the nervous clusters that controlled their forelegs, how to target the vulnerable gill slits that could cause rapid suffocation, and the precise angle needed to penetrate their exoskeleton with standard human combat knives. The key to fighting any non-human opponent is understanding that they evolved under different pressures than we did, the instructor explained matter-of-factly. Vorthans, for example, evolved as herd animals on a low-gravity world with minimal predation. Their flight response is much stronger than their fight response. Apply sufficient psychological pressure, and they'll break formation and flee rather than maintain tactical cohesion. A cadet in the front row raised his hand. "What about the Vorthan honor codes, sir?" My xenosociology professor said they place enormous importance on martial glory. Cadet Harrison makes an excellent point. Yes, Vorthans have elaborate cultural concepts about honor in battle. But honor is a luxury species can afford when they're not facing extinction. Put a Vorthan commander in a position where he must choose between honor and survival, and biology will trump culture every time. Their instincts will override their training. Zektharov's translator unit was struggling with some of the emotional undertones in the human speech, but the meaning was clear enough. These humans had studied his people with the cold efficiency of apex predators analyzing prey. Every cultural strength had been cataloged as a potential weakness to exploit. The afternoon brought a tour of the Academy's simulation facilities, where cadets practice combat scenarios in fully immersive virtual environments. Zekharov observed groups of students working through complex tactical problems, their solutions often involving devastating levels of collateral damage that would horrify most galactic military observers. In one simulation, a cadet team was tasked with liberating a civilian population from occupying forces. Rather than attempting a surgical strike to minimize casualties, the human students systematically destroyed the planet's infrastructure, making the occupation economically unsustainable and forcing the enemy to withdraw. Millions of simulated civilians died in the process, but the cadets discussed the outcome as a successful mission. "The civilian casualties are regrettable," explained the simulation instructor when Zekharov questioned the methodology. But the alternative was a prolonged occupation that would have resulted in systematic cultural genocide. Sometimes you have to burn down the village to save it. Our cadets learned to make these hard choices early in their training. Colonel Martinez guided him through the Academy's physical training facilities, where cadets engaged in combat exercises that seemed designed to cause serious injury. Humans sparred with edged weapons, practiced unarmed combat techniques that could cripple or kill, and endured endurance tests that would hospitalize members of most civilized species. Human physiology gives us certain advantages, Martinez explained as they watched cadets completing an obstacle course that included climbing vertical walls, swimming through underwater tunnels, and carrying wounded comrades across significant distances. We evolved as persistence hunters on a high-gravity world with an oxygen-rich atmosphere. What other species consider extreme physical stress is merely uncomfortable for us. Zekthara watched a young female cadet complete the course despite what appeared to be a significant injury to her leg. Rather than seeking medical attention, she wrapped the wound with field dressings and immediately began assisting other cadets through the more difficult obstacles. Her behavior was typical rather than exceptional. Humans seem to possess an almost supernatural tolerance for pain and physical hardship. The day's final stop was the Academy's Strategic Planning Center, where senior cadets worked on real-world scenarios under the guidance of active military officers. The problems they addressed were not theoretical exercises, but actual contingency plans for potential conflicts throughout the galaxy. Zekthara realized with growing dread that he was observing the development of military strategies that could be implemented against any species, including his own. "We believe in preparing our officers for any eventuality," Martinez said as they observed a group analyzing supply lines for a hypothetical invasion of the Andromedan Collective. Human history teaches us that today's ally can become tomorrow's enemy. Our graduates must be ready to fight anyone, anywhere, under any circumstances. The cadet team was developing a plan that would effectively cut off food production across 17 star systems, creating mass starvation that would force the collective's surrender within months. The logistics involved were staggering, requiring coordination across multiple sectors and the deployment of biological agents that would destroy crop yields without directly targeting civilian populations. It was genocide by starvation, planned with the same methodical precision used for any other military operation. As evening fell and the Academy's lights began to illuminate the grounds, Zekthara accompanied Martinez to the officers' mess for dinner. The conversation among the human instructors was casual, ranging from family matters to sports scores, yet even their off-duty discussions revealed the predatory mindset that permeated human military culture. "My daughter just started at the preparatory academy on Mars," one professor mentioned over dinner. "She's excited about following in her grandfather's footsteps. He served in the Titan campaigns." "Excellent. We need more families with military traditions," another instructor replied. "The warrior ethos doesn't develop overnight. It has to be cultivated across generations." Zekthara listened to their casual discussion of creating a hereditary warrior caste and felt his auxiliary hearts racing. Most civilized species maintained clear distinctions between military and civilian populations, but humans seemed determined to militarize their entire society. They were breeding soldiers the way agricultural species bred livestock, selecting for specific traits across multiple generations. The meal itself was another revelation. Human food was aggressively flavored with chemical compounds that would be toxic to most galactic species. Even their recreational consumption involved controlled poisoning with alcohol, a practice that demonstrated their species' remarkable metabolic resilience. They could literally drink substances that would kill Vorthans and treat it as entertainment. "Tomorrow we'll show you our advanced weapons systems and the strategic studies program," Martinez mentioned as they concluded dinner. "I think you'll find our approach to galactic security quite enlightening." That night, alone in his assigned quarters, Zekthara reviewed his observations and began composing his preliminary report. The sterile efficiency of the Academy's educational programs masked something far more disturbing than he had anticipated. These humans weren't simply training military officers. They were creating a generation of perfectly functional sociopaths, capable of committing atrocities while maintaining the psychological stability needed for effective leadership. The Academy's motto was inscribed above the entrance to every building: "Victory through superior preparation." Zekthara was beginning to understand that human preparation for warfare involved a level of systematic brutality that most species couldn't comprehend. They planned for conflicts that might occur decades in the future, developed strategies for fighting enemies they hadn't yet encountered, and trained their young to consider genocide as a routine tactical option. As he settled into the uncomfortable human furniture designed for bipedal physiology, Zekthara realized that his mission had already succeeded beyond the Galactic Council's expectations. He had gained unprecedented insight into human military doctrine and training methods. The terrifying reality was that everything the galaxy feared about humanity was absolutely true and represented only a fraction of their actual capabilities. Sleep did not come easily to the Vorthan commander that night. Through his quarters window, he could see the academy grounds illuminated by artificial lighting, with cadets still moving between buildings for late-night training exercises. The humans never seemed to rest completely, always preparing for the next conflict, the next challenge to their species' survival. Tomorrow would bring new revelations about humanity's military capabilities, but Zekthara already understood the fundamental truth that would shape his final report. The humans weren't just warriors. They were the ultimate evolutionary expression of predatory intelligence, capable of planning and executing violence on scales that defied galactic comprehension. And they were training 8,000 of their best and brightest to become even more efficient killers. The galaxy's greatest mistake had been assuming that humanity's rapid expansion was driven by exploration and curiosity. The truth was far more ominous. They were mapping potential battlefields and identifying future enemies. Every human colony ship was also a forward military base. Every trade agreement contained the seeds of future strategic advantage, and every diplomatic mission gathered intelligence for eventual conquest. As exhaustion finally overcame anxiety, Zekthara's last conscious thought was a prayer to the Vorthan ancestors that his people would never give humanity a reason to implement the strategies being taught within these walls. Dawn broke over the academy grounds with military precision, marked by the synchronized sound of 8,000 cadets beginning their daily physical training regimen. Zekthara's sleep had been fitful, filled with disturbing dreams of human fleets descending on Vorthan worlds. He adjusted his environmental suit's settings and prepared himself for whatever new horrors the day might reveal. Colonel Martinez appeared at his quarters precisely at the scheduled time, her uniform as immaculate as the previous day, despite what Zekthara suspected had been a very short night. Humans seemed to require less recovery time than most species, another evolutionary advantage that translated directly into military capability. "Good morning, Commander." She greeted him with that unsettling human smile. "Today we'll be touring our Advanced Weapons Systems laboratory and observing some live-fire exercises. I think you'll find our technological developments quite impressive." Their first destination was a massive underground complex that extended far deeper than the Academy's surface structure suggested. As they descended via high-speed elevator, Martinez provided background information that made Zekthara's primary heart skip several beats. The weapons research facility was established 50 years ago as a joint venture between the Academy and several private defense corporations, she explained. "Our cadets work directly with active research projects, giving them hands-on experience with cutting-edge military technology while contributing to actual weapons development. It's quite efficient. We train the next generation of officers while simultaneously advancing our defensive capabilities." The elevator opened into a corridor that stretched beyond visual range in both directions, lined with laboratories and testing chambers. Through reinforced viewports, Zekthara could see cadets working alongside civilian researchers on projects that defied galactic weapons treaties. In one lab, students were calibrating antimatter containment systems for torpedo warheads. In another, they observed the effects of experimental neural disruptors on captured alien neural tissue samples. This particular research focuses on developing weapons systems optimized for specific alien physiologies, Martinez said, leading him to a laboratory where cadets were testing projectile designs. Standard human ammunition is often ineffective against species with different evolutionary adaptations. We've learned to customize our approach. The laboratory displayed an array of specialized ammunition designed for use against various galactic species. Zekthera recognized bullets designed to penetrate Andromedan crystal armor, gas rounds formulated to exploit Centauri respiratory weaknesses, and projectiles that would fragment specifically to maximize damage to Vorthan exoskeletons. The casual efficiency with which humans had weaponized xenobiology was breathtaking in its implications. A young cadet approached their group, carrying a tablet displaying test results. "Colonel Martinez, we've completed the neural mapping analysis for the hegemony species. The new sonic disruptors show 93% effectiveness in disrupting their hive mind communications." Martinez nodded approvingly. "Excellent work, Cadet Shun. What's the recommended deployment strategy?" "Orbital bombardment with sonic charges, ma'am. A synchronized strike across their primary colonies would sever the hive mind permanently. Individual drones would lose higher cognitive function within hours and become essentially helpless." Zekthera listened in growing horror as these young humans discussed the systematic lobotomization of an entire species with the same tone they might use to discuss weather conditions. The hegemony had been humanity's allies in the recent Corvin conflict, yet here were cadets developing weapons specifically designed to destroy their collective consciousness. "We believe in preparing for all contingencies," Martinez said, noting Zekthera's distress. "The hegemony are currently our allies, but their expansionist tendencies could eventually bring them into conflict with human interests. Better to have solutions ready than to scramble for weapons when diplomacy fails." They moved to another section where cadets were working with captured alien technology, reverse engineering weapon systems, and adapting them for human use. Zekthera recognized several pieces of equipment that had been reported stolen from various galactic military installations over the past decade. The humans weren't just developing original weapons. They were systematically acquiring and improving upon everyone else's military technology. "Academic exchange programs have been quite valuable," Martinez explained when Zekthera questioned the presence of obviously non-human equipment. "We encourage our cadets to study abroad, and they often return with fascinating insights into alternative approaches to military technology. Cultural exchange benefits everyone." The implications were staggering. Human cadets were being sent to military academies across the galaxy as spies, systematically gathering intelligence and acquiring samples of alien weapons technology. What other species viewed as educational cooperation, humans had weaponized into an intelligence-gathering operation of unprecedented scope. In the next laboratory, cadets were working with what appeared to be biological weapons. Sealed containment units held various pathogens, each labeled with target species information. Zekthera read designations for viruses designed to attack Centauri immune systems, bacteria that would devastate Andromedan crystal growth processes, and, most disturbing of all, a fungal agent specifically engineered to compromise Vorthan exoskeleton integrity. "Biological warfare is unfortunately sometimes necessary," Martinez said, observing his reaction. "When facing species with significant technological or numerical advantages, asymmetric approaches become essential. We've learned to think creatively about force multiplication." A supervising professor approached their group, her hands still gloved from working with dangerous biological samples. "Colonel, you might be interested in our latest breakthrough. We've successfully modified the Rigelian plague to target multiple species simultaneously. The vectored strain could theoretically affect every known sapient species except humans." "Impressive work, Dr. Patel. What's the projected deployment method?" "Atmospheric seeding via trade ship routing. The incubation period has been extended to allow maximum distribution before symptoms manifest. We estimate we could achieve pandemic status across the core systems within 6 months." Zekthera's translator unit struggled with the technical terminology, but the meaning was horrifyingly clear. These humans had developed a biological weapon capable of committing galaxy-wide genocide while leaving themselves completely unaffected. They were discussing the potential extinction of all non-human life with the same casual professionalism used for any other engineering project. The tour continued to the kinetic weapons testing facility, where cadets observed the effects of various projectile systems on mock alien fortifications. Targets were constructed to replicate the architectural styles and defensive technologies of different species, allowing human weapons designers to optimize their destructive potential against specific enemies. Kinetic bombardment remains one of our most effective tactical options, Martinez explained as they watched cadets calculate orbital strike trajectories. Simple physics is difficult to defend against, and the psychological impact of relativistic projectiles is considerable. Most species surrender rather than face complete planetary devastation. The testing chamber contains scale models of major galactic cities, each constructed with meticulous attention to detail. Zekthara recognized the distinctive spiral architecture of the Vorthan capital, the crystalline spires of the Andromedan homeworld, and the underground complexes favored by the Centauri Republic. Human weapons specialists had mapped out exactly how to destroy every major population center in known space. Cadets were practicing targeting calculations that would maximize civilian casualties while preserving economically valuable infrastructure. Their approach to conquest was horrifyingly pragmatic. They planned to kill just enough aliens to ensure compliance while preserving the productive capacity needed to fuel further expansion. "We've learned from historical examples," Martinez said, noting his distress. "Complete genocide is economically inefficient. Better to eliminate resistance while maintaining enough population to operate essential industries. It's more sustainable in the long term." The afternoon brought a visit to the Academy's Strategic Studies Center, where senior cadets worked on actual invasion plans for various galactic powers. The sophistication of their analysis was remarkable. They had identified resource choke points, calculated supply line vulnerabilities, and developed contingency plans for every possible defensive strategy their targets might employ. Zekthara found himself looking at a holographic display showing projected invasion routes into Vorthan space. The analysis was devastatingly thorough, accounting for patrol schedules, defensive fleet positioning, and even the psychological profiles of individual Vorthan commanders. The humans had identified exactly how to exploit his people's cultural emphasis on honor and martial glory to lure their fleets into devastating ambushes. "The Vorthans present an interesting tactical challenge," explained the cadet team leader, a young woman who couldn't have been older than 20 Earth years. "Their warrior culture makes them predictable in some ways, but their technological base is quite sophisticated. Our analysis suggests a three-pronged approach would be most effective." She activated the holographic display, showing fleet movements that would unfold over several months. The human strategy involved feinting attacks that would trigger Vorthan honor codes, forcing their fleets to respond predictably while human forces positioned for devastating flanking maneuvers. The plan culminated with the systematic destruction of Vorthan shipyards and the deployment of biological agents targeting their agricultural worlds. Estimated timeline for complete conquest is 14 months. The cadet continued matter-of-factly. Projected casualties are approximately 60% of the Vorthan population, with survivors relocated to controlled territories for resource extraction and labor purposes. The existing industrial base will be converted to human specifications within 2 years. A supervising officer nodded approvingly. "Excellent analysis, Cadet Morrison. What contingencies have you developed for unexpected Vorthan responses?" "We've identified 17 possible deviations from predicted behavior patterns, sir. Each has corresponding counter-strategies that maintain the operational timeline. The key is preventing Vorthan forces from achieving tactical coherence by exploiting their psychological vulnerabilities." Zekthara listened in stunned silence as these young humans casually discussed the subjugation of his entire species. They had studied Vorthan culture, psychology, and military doctrine with the same systematic thoroughness that a biologist might apply to laboratory specimens. Every cultural strength had been cataloged as a weakness to exploit, every military tradition analyzed for tactical vulnerabilities. The Strategic Studies program included active scenario planning for conflicts that might not occur for decades. Cadets developed contingency plans for potential future enemies, including species that hadn't yet achieved spaceflight capability. The humans were literally planning to conquer civilizations that didn't know they existed. Long-term strategic thinking is essential, Martinez explained when Zekthera questioned the scope of their planning. Human expansion will inevitably bring us into contact with new species, and some of those encounters will result in conflict. Better to have strategies prepared than to improvise during actual hostilities. In another section, cadets were analyzing economic warfare strategies that could cripple galactic civilizations without firing a single shot. They had identified critical resource dependencies, mapped trade networks, and developed scenarios for systematically destroying alien economies through targeted disruption. The economic collapse of entire star systems could be achieved through carefully coordinated attacks on key infrastructure nodes. Economic warfare is often more effective than direct military action, explained the instructor. Destroying an enemy's ability to feed and equip their population eliminates their capacity for organized resistance. It's more subtle than bombardment, but ultimately more devastating. The cadets presented case studies of successful economic warfare campaigns from human history, adapted for galactic-scale implementation. They had learned to weaponize trade relationships, turning commercial dependencies into strategic vulnerabilities. Species that traded with humans were unknowingly providing intelligence about their economic weaknesses while becoming dependent on human-controlled resources. As the day progressed, Zekthera began to understand the true scope of human strategic thinking. They weren't simply preparing for possible conflicts. They were actively creating the conditions for future wars while positioning themselves for inevitable victory. Every diplomatic mission, every trade agreement, every cultural exchange was part of a vast intelligence-gathering operation designed to map galactic weaknesses. The Academy's intelligence analysis program was particularly disturbing. Cadets were trained in advanced psychological profiling, learning to exploit the emotional and cultural vulnerabilities of different alien species. They studied xenosociology not to promote understanding, but to identify pressure points that could be used to manipulate alien behavior. Understanding your enemy's psychology is more valuable than understanding their technology, the intelligence instructor explained to a group of cadets. Technology can be countered with superior technology, but psychological vulnerabilities are inherent to the species. A well-designed propaganda campaign can accomplish more than an entire fleet. The cadets practiced developing psychological warfare strategies targeted at specific alien populations. They created propaganda designed to exploit Andromedan perfectionism, developed demoralization campaigns that would trigger Centauri flight responses, and crafted messages specifically designed to shatter Vorthan concepts of honor and martial duty. The key is understanding that every species has evolutionary weaknesses that can be exploited through psychological pressure, the instructor continued. Humans evolved as social predators, giving us intuitive understanding of group psychology and pack dynamics. We can manipulate other species' social structures in ways they literally cannot comprehend. Evening brought a live-fire demonstration where cadets showcased their proficiency with various weapon systems. The exercise simulated a combined arms assault on a fortified alien position, complete with orbital bombardment, ground assault, and chemical weapons deployment. The cadets executed their roles with chilling efficiency, coordinating devastating attacks while maintaining perfect discipline under fire. Zekthera watched young humans operate weapons that could level cities, coordinate strikes that would kill millions, and make tactical decisions that involved acceptable casualty levels in the tens of thousands. They displayed the same emotional detachment that seasoned veterans might show after decades of combat experience. Yet most of these cadets had never seen actual warfare. Our training methodology is quite effective, Martinez observed as they watched the exercise conclude. We've learned that human psychological conditioning is remarkably adaptable. Young minds can be shaped to accept necessary violence without developing counterproductive emotional responses. The demonstration concluded with a debrief session where cadets analyzed their performance and identified areas for improvement. Their discussions focused entirely on tactical efficiency, how to kill more effectively, destroy more completely, and achieve military objectives with minimal resource expenditure. There was no discussion of ethical considerations or civilian casualties beyond their impact on operational security. Excellent work overall, the supervising officer told the cadets. Your coordination was exemplary, and the casualty ratios exceeded projections. Remember, the goal is always maximum enemy destruction with minimum friendly losses. Sentiment has no place in effective military operations. As they returned to the main academy complex, Zekthara reflected on the day's observations with growing despair. The humans had systematized warfare to a degree that was almost incomprehensible. They had analyzed every aspect of galactic military capability, identified weaknesses in every known species, and developed specific strategies for defeating any possible enemy. The most disturbing realization was that human military doctrine assumed eventual conflict with everyone. They weren't preparing to defend themselves against aggression. They were preparing to be the aggressors. Every alliance was temporary. Every diplomatic relationship was a prelude to conquest, and every peaceful interaction was an opportunity to gather intelligence for future wars. That night, as Zekthara reviewed his notes and prepared for the final day of his tour, he began to understand the terrible truth about humanity's place in the galaxy. They weren't just another spacefaring species seeking their place among the stars. They were an existential threat to every other form of life. Their military academy wasn't training defenders of human interests. It was creating the instruments of galactic conquest. The humans had learned to hide their predatory nature behind diplomatic courtesy and economic cooperation, but their true intentions were evident in the systematic way they prepared for universal warfare. They were patient predators, content to gather intelligence and develop strategies while maintaining the fiction of peaceful coexistence. Tomorrow would bring the final phase of his tour, but Zekthara already knew that his report would shatter any remaining illusions about humanity's peaceful intentions. The galaxy's greatest predators were hiding in plain sight, disguised as explorers and traders while secretly preparing for the day when diplomacy would give way to conquest. The third day of Commander Zekthara's tour began before dawn with an unexpected development that would prove far more revealing than any planned demonstration. An alarm echoed across the academy grounds, followed by announcements directing all personnel to emergency stations. Rather than evacuating him to safety, Colonel Martinez led him toward the source of the disturbance. Real-world training opportunity, she explained with that characteristic human enthusiasm for conflict. One of our deep space monitoring stations has detected an unidentified fleet approaching the system. Probably just merchants who forgot to file proper transit papers, but it gives our cadets a chance to practice actual threat assessment procedures. They entered the Academy's command center, a vast facility that Zekthara realized was far more sophisticated than any training simulation should require. Banks of displays showed real-time data from sensor networks throughout human space, while cadets worked alongside active military personnel to analyze the approaching vessels. The line between education and operational military intelligence had apparently been erased entirely. Contact confirmed as Hegemony Third Fleet reported a senior cadet monitoring communications channels. They're requesting permission to conduct routine training exercises in the outer system, but their formation suggests combat readiness rather than training protocols. Zekthara felt his auxiliary hearts racing as he recognized the tactical situation unfolding. The Hegemony were humanity's supposed allies, yet the cadets were analyzing their fleet movements with the same intensity they would apply to enemy forces. More disturbing was the realization that this training facility was apparently an active military command center disguised as an educational institution. Cadet Morrison, what's your assessment? Martinez asked the young woman who had presented invasion plans for Vorthan space the previous day. Morrison studied the tactical displays with professional competence that belonged on a warship bridge, not in a classroom. Ma'am, the Hegemony formation is optimized for planetary bombardment rather than training exercises. Their ships are carrying full military payloads, and their approach vector would give them optimal firing positions on our orbital installations. Recommendations? Deploy the 3rd and 7th fleets to intercept positions, activate planetary defense grids, and begin evacuation of non-essential personnel from orbital facilities. If they maintain current approach, we should consider preemptive action before they achieve optimal firing positions. Zekthara watched in stunned fascination as cadets who should have been attending lectures began coordinating actual military responses to a potential threat. Their analysis was devastatingly professional, treating their supposed allies as hostile forces based purely on tactical considerations rather than diplomatic relationships. Excellent assessment, Martinez approved. However, we need to consider the political ramifications of deploying fleets against our allies. Cadet Chun, what alternative approaches would you recommend? Chun, the same young man who had discussed neural mapping of hegemony species the previous day, activated a different set of displays. We could deploy our merchant vessels to shadow their fleet. The converted cargo ships would appear non-threatening while providing close-range intelligence gathering and positioning for surprise attacks if needed. Simultaneously, we activate economic pressure through our trade networks to discourage aggressive action. The sophistication of their response was terrifying in its implications. These cadets had immediate access to military assets that could be deployed at a moment's notice, disguised as civilian operations. The Academy wasn't just training future officers. It was apparently an active military command post with the capability to coordinate actual warfare. Commander Zekthara, Martinez said, turning toward him with an expression that no longer seemed entirely friendly. Perhaps you could provide some insight into hegemony tactical doctrine? Your species has fought alongside them in recent conflicts. The question was phrased politely, but Zekthara recognized the underlying threat. He was being asked to provide intelligence about supposed allies, presumably for use in the tactical scenario developing in real time. His response could potentially influence actual military decisions that might result in interstellar conflict. The hegemony prefer overwhelming force deployment when they anticipate resistance, he said carefully. Their hive mind coordination gives them advantages in complex tactical situations, but they struggle with rapid adaptation to unexpected circumstances. Several cadets immediately began incorporating this information into their threat assessments, updating their tactical recommendations based on alien intelligence. Zekthara realized he had just contributed to human military planning against forces that should have been their allies. Their hive mind communication also represents a critical vulnerability, added the instructor who had discussed sonic weapons the previous day. Disrupting their collective consciousness would reduce them to individual drones incapable of coordinated action. We have assets in position to implement neural disruption if necessary. The casual way humans discussed deploying weapons against their allies confirmed Zekthara's growing suspicion that humanity viewed all other species as potential enemies. Alliance relationships were merely temporary conveniences that would be discarded the moment they conflicted with human interests. Over the next several hours, he observed cadets practicing real-world crisis management as the hegemony fleet situation developed. They coordinated intelligence gathering, analyzed enemy capabilities, and developed multiple response scenarios ranging from diplomatic solutions to full-scale preemptive strikes. Their professionalism was remarkable, but so was their complete willingness to betray allies if tactical considerations demanded it. The hegemony have agreed to modify their approach vector, reported a communications officer. They'll conduct their exercises in the outer system as originally requested. Excellent, Martinez said. Stand down from alert status, but maintain enhanced monitoring. Cadet Morrison, what lessons should we extract from this exercise? Ma'am, the incident demonstrates the importance of maintaining military readiness regardless of diplomatic relationships. Today's ally could become tomorrow's enemy with no warning. We should treat all foreign military forces as potential threats regardless of their stated intentions. Outstanding analysis. The galaxy is a dangerous place, and human survival depends on our willingness to prepare for any eventuality. Friendship is a luxury we cannot afford when our species' existence is at stake. Zekthara listened to this debriefing with growing horror. The humans had analyzed a routine training exercise by their allies as a potential prelude to invasion, developed detailed response plans that included preemptive strikes, and concluded that all non-human military forces should be considered inherently hostile. Their paranoia was matched only by their capability to act on those suspicions. The afternoon brought a tour of the Academy's most classified facilities, areas that Zekthara suspected were normally off-limits to foreign observers. Martinez explained that the morning's crisis had convinced the Academy Board that he should understand the full scope of human military capabilities, presumably to carry that message back to his own government. Their destination was a deep underground complex that extended far beneath the Academy's visible structures. The elevator descended for several minutes, passing through multiple security checkpoints that scanned both visitors with technology advanced enough to analyze their biological and psychological states in real time. "Welcome to the Strategic Planning Archive," Martinez announced as they entered a vast chamber filled with holographic displays and quantum computers. This facility contains humanity's complete library of tactical and strategic planning for every known scenario involving galactic conflict. The scope of the archive was breathtaking. Holographic displays showed detailed invasion plans for every major galactic power, contingency strategies for alien first contact scenarios, and economic warfare plans that could cripple entire stellar civilizations. The humans hadn't just planned for likely conflicts. They had developed strategies for every conceivable military situation. "We began serious strategic planning immediately after achieving faster-than-light travel," Martinez explained as they walked through corridors lined with classified research projects. "Human history taught us that first contact situations often result in conflict, so we decided to be prepared for any eventuality." Zekthara observed detailed models of every major galactic military installation, complete with structural analyses and vulnerability assessments. The humans had apparently been gathering intelligence on potential enemies for decades, using diplomatic missions and trade relationships to map defensive capabilities throughout known space. "Academic exchange programs have been particularly valuable," Martinez continued. "Young alien minds are remarkably willing to share information about their homeworld's defensive capabilities when they believe they're simply discussing theoretical military science with human students." The implications were staggering. Every foreign student who had attended human educational institutions had unknowingly provided intelligence for future military operations against their own species. Cultural exchange programs have been weaponized into systematic espionage operations. In one section, cadets were working with quantum simulation systems that modeled entire galactic conflicts in accelerated time. They could test thousands of strategic variations, identifying optimal approaches for conquering different combinations of alien powers. The scenarios they explored included simultaneous wars against multiple species, galactic-wide insurgencies, and complete sterilization campaigns. "Quantum strategic modeling allows us to explore conflict scenarios that would be impossible to test in reality," explained the supervising officer. "We can wargame entire galactic conflicts in compressed time, testing every possible strategic variation until we identify optimal approaches." Zekthara watched cadets running simulations of humanity's conquest of the entire galaxy, systematically determining which species should be eliminated, which should be enslaved, and which might be useful as collaborators. The scenarios they explored were comprehensively genocidal, treating galactic conquest as an inevitable outcome rather than a theoretical possibility. "Current projections suggest we could achieve galactic dominance within 50 years if we begin systematic expansion now," reported a cadet analyzing simulation results. "The key is preventing potential enemies from forming effective coalitions by exploiting their mutual antagonisms and cultural differences." "What about species that haven't achieved spaceflight yet?" asked another student. "We maintain monitoring stations around pre-spaceflight civilizations," the instructor replied. "If any show signs of developing dangerous technologies or expanding beyond their home systems, we have protocols for intervention." It's more efficient to eliminate potential threats before they become actual problems. The humans were planning preventive genocide against species that might someday pose challenges to their expansion. They were systematically cataloging every potentially intelligent species in the galaxy and developing strategies for their elimination or subjugation before they could develop space travel capabilities. Martinez led him to another section where cadets studied captured alien prisoners through one-way observation windows. Representatives of various galactic species were being subjected to psychological testing. Their responses carefully analyzed to develop improved manipulation and interrogation techniques. The prisoners appeared to be unaware they were being studied, apparently believing they were receiving medical treatment or participating in cultural exchanges. Xenopsychology is essential for effective alien relations, Martinez explained matter-of-factly. We need to understand how different species think and react under stress. Our prisoner exchange programs with various governments provide excellent research opportunities. Zekthara realized that aliens who disappeared during diplomatic missions or were captured during minor conflicts weren't being returned to their governments as promised. Instead, they were being held in secret research facilities where human scientists studied their psychological vulnerabilities and developed improved methods for manipulating their species. We've made remarkable discoveries about alien psychology, continued the facility's research director, a woman whose clinical detachment was deeply unsettling. Most species have predictable breakdown patterns under psychological pressure. We've learned to trigger specific responses that make interrogation much more efficient. In one observation chamber, a Centauri diplomatic attaché who had supposedly died in a transport accident was being subjected to sensory deprivation designed to exploit his species' social dependency needs. His psychological deterioration was being carefully monitored and recorded for use in developing propaganda and psychological warfare strategies. Another chamber contained a Vorthan military officer who had vanished during a joint training exercise 6 months earlier. He was being exposed to synthetic pheromones designed to trigger artificial fear responses, his reactions carefully analyzed to develop improved methods for breaking Vorthan morale during combat situations. The Vorthan subject has been particularly valuable, the research director noted, apparently unaware of Zekthara's growing distress. His responses to various psychological stimuli have provided insights into exploiting the Vorthan warrior culture's underlying anxieties about inadequacy and failure. Zekthara stared at the imprisoned officer, recognizing him as Commander Veltar from the Vorthan 7th Fleet. Veltar had been reported killed when his shuttle suffered mechanical failure during routine diplomatic mission to a human colony world. Instead, he had been secretly captured and subjected to months of psychological experimentation. Commander Veltar was believed dead, Zekthara said carefully, struggling to control his emotional responses. Officially, yes, Martinez replied without apparent concern. But his death provided an excellent opportunity to study Vorthan psychology under control conditions. He's contributed valuable data to our understanding of your species' behavioral patterns. His sacrifice will ultimately save lives by helping us develop more efficient methods for ending conflicts quickly. The casual way Martinez discussed torturing a Vorthan officer while standing next to another Vorthan observer was characteristic of human psychological warfare. They wanted him to know about their capabilities to carry that terror back to his own government. They were demonstrating their willingness to torture prisoners while maintaining plausible deniability about their actions. The day's final revelation came in a briefing room where senior cadets presented their capstone projects, comprehensive strategic plans for humanity's expansion across the galaxy. These weren't theoretical exercises, but detailed operational proposals that could apparently be implemented with minimal preparation time. The Terran Expansion Project represents our most ambitious strategic planning to date, explained the presenting cadet, a young man who spoke about galactic conquest with the enthusiasm of someone discussing a school science project. Phase 1 involves systematic weakening of potential opposition through economic warfare and psychological operations. Phase 2 implements direct military action against remaining resistance. Phase 3 establishes human control over all habitable systems within a 50 light-year radius of Earth. The presentation included detailed timelines, resource requirements, and casualty projections. The cadets had planned humanity's conquest of local space with meticulous attention to detail, accounting for everything from supply line logistics to post-conquest population management. Their projections included the systematic extermination of species deemed incompatible with human expansion. Estimated timeline for Phase 1 completion is 12 years. The cadet continued. Economic disruption operations are already underway through our trade networks, while psychological operations have been testing alien population responses for the past decade. Phase 2 can begin whenever political leadership determines the galaxy is sufficiently destabilized. Zekthara realized that humanity's peaceful expansion over the past several decades had been carefully orchestrated preparation for systematic conquest. Every trade agreement, every diplomatic mission, every cultural exchange had been designed to weaken potential opposition while positioning human forces for eventual military action. "What resistance do you anticipate from current galactic powers?" asked a supervising officer. "Minimal, sir. Our analysis suggests that most species will surrender rather than face complete extinction. Those that choose to resist lack the military cohesion necessary for effective opposition." The Galactic Council's diplomatic approach to conflict resolution leaves them psychologically unprepared for humanity's style of warfare. The human assessment of galactic military capabilities was devastatingly accurate. Most spacefaring species had evolved beyond their predatory instincts, developing sophisticated diplomatic traditions that emphasize negotiation over violence. They were constitutionally incapable of matching human ruthlessness when conflicts escalated beyond peaceful resolution. "The key is maintaining surprise until we achieve overwhelming strategic advantage," added another cadet. Current galactic powers view humans as relatively benign traders and explorers. They won't recognize the threat until our military expansion is too advanced to counter effectively. As evening approached and the tour concluded, Zekthara accompanied Martinez to a final briefing session with the Academy's senior staff. The casual conversation among human instructors revealed the true scope of their species' galactic ambitions. "The commander's visit has been quite valuable," one professor mentioned. "Having direct observation of alien psychological responses to our capabilities will help refine our intimidation strategies. Fear is often more effective than actual violence for achieving compliance." "Agreed," replied another instructor. "The Vorthan military's reputation for honor and courage makes them valuable test subjects for psychological warfare development. If we can break their morale, other species will be much easier to manage." Zekthara listened to their discussion with growing understanding that his entire visit had been a carefully orchestrated psychological operation. The humans hadn't simply allowed him to observe their military capabilities. They had deliberately exposed him to their most terrifying secrets, knowing he would carry that information back to his own government. The message was clear. Humanity possessed the capability and willingness to destroy any species that opposed their expansion. They had spent decades preparing for galactic conquest while maintaining the facade of peaceful exploration. Their military academy wasn't just training officers, it was developing the strategic plans and psychological weapons necessary for systematic galactic domination. That night, alone in his quarters, Zekthara began composing his final report with the knowledge that it would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the galaxy. The evidence he had gathered proved that humanity represented an existential threat to every other spacefaring species. The humans had revealed their capabilities not through oversight or carelessness, but as a deliberate demonstration of their power. They wanted the galaxy to know what was coming, to understand that resistance would be futile. Terror was itself a weapon, and they had successfully weaponized his entire diplomatic mission. The final day of Commander Zekthara's tour arrived with an atmosphere of barely concealed anticipation among the Academy staff. He had spent a sleepless night reviewing his observations and preparing for what he suspected would be humanity's ultimate revelation. Colonel Martinez appeared at his quarters with the same professional courtesy she had maintained throughout his visit, but there was something different in her demeanor, a predatory satisfaction that suggested the tour's true purpose was about to be revealed. "Today we have something special planned," she announced as they walked across the academy grounds. "The commandant has requested a personal meeting with you. Admiral Chun rarely makes time for visiting dignitaries, but your observations have been quite valuable to our program." Admiral Chun turned out to be the same instructor Zekthara had observed discussing the Kepler 442 battle on his first day, the man with cybernetic implants who had casually discussed ramming enemy flagships as standard tactical doctrine. Now, meeting him in the ornate confines of the commandant's office, Zekthara realized he was face-to-face with one of humanity's most notorious military leaders. "Commander Zekthara," Admiral Chin greeted him with a smile that managed to be simultaneously welcoming and terrifying. "I trust your tour has been educational. Please sit. We have much to discuss." The office was decorated with artifacts from human military history, weapons, flags, and holographic displays showing famous battles. Most disturbing was a collection of alien artifacts that Zekthara recognized as trophies from various conflicts, including several items that should have been returned to their respective governments under diplomatic agreements. "Your species has an impressive military tradition," Chun continued, activating a holographic display that showed Vorthan battle formations. "The Battle of Sigma Draconis was particularly instructive. Your commander's willingness to sacrifice entire squadrons for tactical advantage demonstrated admirable commitment to victory." Zekthara felt his auxiliary hearts racing as he recognized classified tactical information from a battle that had occurred only months earlier. The humans had somehow obtained detailed intelligence about Vorthan military operations, including strategic decisions that should have been known only to high-ranking officers. "How did you acquire this information?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Academic research," Chen replied with obvious amusement. "Our students are quite thorough in their historical analysis. They interview veterans, study after-action reports, and occasionally observe actual combat operations to better understand contemporary military doctrine." The implications were staggering. Human cadets were somehow infiltrating active war zones to gather intelligence on alien military capabilities. What appeared to be academic research was actually systematic espionage designed to map the tactical capabilities of every spacefaring species. "Your visit has provided some fascinating insights into Vorthan psychology," Chun continued, manipulating the holographic display to show psychological analysis charts. "Our behavioral specialists have been monitoring your responses throughout the tour. The data will significantly improve our understanding of how Vorthans react to various forms of psychological pressure." Zekthara realized that every moment of his visit had been carefully orchestrated to study his reactions. The humans hadn't simply shown him their capabilities. They had used his responses to those revelations as research data for developing psychological warfare strategies against his entire species. "You've been conducting psychological experiments on me," he said, struggling to maintain diplomatic composure. "Observation and analysis," Chun corrected. "Every diplomatic interaction provides valuable intelligence about alien psychology. Your species' reactions to various stimuli help us understand how to more effectively communicate with Vorthans during future negotiations." The word negotiations was delivered with an emphasis that suggested it encompassed far more than diplomatic discussions. Chun was describing psychological manipulation techniques that could be used to coerce alien governments into accepting human demands through targeted exploitation of their cultural vulnerabilities. "Today's activities will complete our behavioral analysis," Chin announced, activating controls that seal the office doors. "We've arranged some demonstrations that should provide particularly useful data about Vorthan stress responses." Before Zekthara could respond, the office's main display activated to show a live video feed from what appeared to be a Vorthan military facility. He recognized the architecture and insignia of the Vorthax system's primary naval base, his homeworld's most important military installation. How are you showing me this? He demanded, rising from his chair despite the obvious futility of attempting to escape. Quantum entanglement communication, Chen explained matter-of-factly. We established monitoring stations throughout Vorthen space during various diplomatic missions over the past decade. Your government believed they were hosting cultural exchanges and trade negotiations. In reality, they were providing access for our intelligence operations. The video feed showed human operatives moving through Vorthen military facilities with casual familiarity, accessing classified systems, and planting what appeared to be surveillance equipment. They wore Vorthen military uniforms and moved with perfect knowledge of security protocols, suggesting they had spent considerable time infiltrating his people's military organization. The individuals you're observing are graduates of our deep infiltration program, Chun continued. They've spent years integrating into Vorthen society, learning your customs, mastering your language, and gaining positions within your military hierarchy. Several have achieved quite high ranks in your fleet command structure. Zekthara watched in horror as supposed Vorthen officers revealed themselves to be human agents, systematically downloading classified information and installing unknown devices throughout critical systems. The scope of the infiltration was breathtaking. Humans had apparently been operating within Vorthen military command for years without detection. Commander Veltar, whom you met yesterday in our research facility, was instrumental in establishing these operations, Chen explained with obvious satisfaction. His interrogation provided access codes and security protocols that allowed our agents to move freely through Vorthen installations. Quite cooperative, once we explained the alternatives. The video feed switched to show the captured Vorthen officer being forced to watch the systematic compromise of his homeworld's defenses. Veltar's psychological breakdown was clearly visible as he realized that his torture had provided the intelligence necessary for humanity to infiltrate his people's most secure facilities. Your species' concepts of honor and duty make you remarkably predictable, Chen observed clinically. Vorthen officers will endure significant physical torture before breaking, but they collapse almost immediately when forced to witness the consequences of their cooperation. Psychological leverage is far more effective than simple pain. Zekthara found himself experiencing the same psychological pressure that had broken Veltar. Watching human agents operate freely within his homeworld's defenses while knowing his own diplomatic mission had contributed to those security breaches created a sense of helpless despair that transcended physical fear. The demonstrations continuing on your homeworld are just the beginning, Chun said, manipulating controls to show additional video feeds from across Vorthen space. Similar operations are currently underway on every major Vorthen world. By the time you return home, our people will have complete access to your military, industrial, and governmental systems. The feeds showed human infiltration operations across the entire Vorthen civilization. Agents were accessing planetary defense networks, mapping industrial facilities, and identifying key personnel for potential elimination or recruitment. The systematic nature of the operation suggested decades of preparation and coordination. Why are you showing me this? Zekthara asked, though he suspected the answer would be more terrifying than ignorance. Because your mission was never about observing our military academy, Chen replied with that characteristic human smile. You were selected to carry a message back to the Galactic Council. The tour, the revelations, the psychological pressure, everything has been designed to create the perfect messenger for humanity's ultimatum to the galaxy. Chen activated another display showing similar infiltration operations throughout known space. Human agents had apparently penetrated every major galactic civilization, establishing the infrastructure necessary for simultaneous attacks across multiple systems. The scope of their preparation was beyond anything the galaxy's diplomatic institutions could comprehend. Every species represented on the Galactic Council has been similarly compromised, Chun continued. Our agents have spent decades mapping your defensive capabilities, identifying your psychological vulnerabilities, and positioning themselves to cripple your civilizations from within. The peaceful expansion of humanity was merely preparation for this moment. The display showed real-time intelligence from across the galaxy. Andromedan crystal formations being sabotaged, Centauri trade networks being systematically disrupted, and hegemony hive mind communication nodes being infected with human-designed viruses. The coordinated nature of these operations suggested they were the opening moves of a galactic-wide assault. "The message you will carry is simple," Chun said, his voice taking on the formal tone of an official proclamation. "Humanity demands the immediate and unconditional surrender of all spacefaring civilizations. Resistance will result in the complete extinction of any species that opposes our expansion. Compliance will be rewarded with continued existence under human administration." Zekthara listened to humanity's ultimatum with growing understanding that the galaxy's political balance had already shifted irrevocably. The humans had spent decades positioning themselves for this moment, systematically undermining every potential source of opposition while maintaining the facade of peaceful exploration. "You have 72 standard hours to deliver this message to the Galactic Council," Chun continued. "At the end of that period, we will begin Phase 2 of our expansion plan. Species that have formally surrendered will be spared. Those that attempt resistance will be eliminated." The clinical efficiency with which Chun delivered humanity's ultimatum was perhaps more terrifying than the threat itself. He was announcing galactic conquest with the same tone another species might use to discuss trade agreements or cultural exchanges. "Your transport has been prepared for immediate departure," Chun said, gesturing toward the office's communications array. "Our message will be transmitted simultaneously to every major galactic government, but your personal testimony will provide the psychological impact necessary to ensure compliance. Fear is often more persuasive than facts." Zekthara realized that his entire diplomatic career had been orchestrated to position him for this moment. The humans had selected him specifically because his reputation for honesty and analytical competence would make his testimony impossible to dismiss as propaganda or deception. "The Academy tour provided excellent preparation for your role as our messenger," Chin observed. "Your psychological profile indicated that exposure to our capabilities would generate the precise combination of terror and despair necessary to convince other species of the futility of resistance." Even his selection for this mission had been manipulated by human intelligence operations. They had studied his psychological profile, identified his strengths and vulnerabilities, and positioned him to become their unwitting agent in spreading terror throughout the galaxy. "One final demonstration before your departure," Chin announced, activating the office's main display to show a live feed from space above Zekthara's homeworld. The orbital view showed what appeared to be a small asteroid drifting toward Vorthak's primary moon. As Zekthara watched, the asteroid began accelerating and changing course, revealing itself to be a massive human warship that had been disguised using advanced stealth technology. "The TS Retribution has been positioned in your home system for the past 6 months," Chin explained. "Your government's sensors classified it as a harmless piece of space debris. In reality, it carries enough firepower to sterilize your entire homeworld within minutes." Additional displays showed similar hidden warships throughout known space. Human fleets had been secretly deployed to every major system, positioned for simultaneous strikes that could cripple galactic civilization before any coordinated resistance could be organized. "These demonstrations serve dual purposes," Chun continued. "They provide evidence of our capabilities while positioning our forces for immediate action if diplomacy fails. We prefer surrender to extermination, but we're prepared for either outcome." The scope of humanity's deception was breathtaking in its audacity. They had convinced the galaxy that they were peaceful explorers while simultaneously deploying the largest military force in known history. Every diplomatic mission, every trade agreement, every cultural exchange had been covered for the systematic positioning of invasion fleets. "Your species' survival depends on your ability to convince the Galactic Council to accept our terms," Chun said with finality. "Resistance would be both futile and catastrophic. We have the capability to eliminate all non-human life in the galaxy within weeks if necessary." As if to emphasize the point, The display showed targeting solutions for every major population center in known space. Human computers had calculated exactly how to achieve maximum casualties with minimum resource expenditure, treating galactic genocide as a logistical problem to be solved efficiently. However, Chin continued, his tone becoming slightly less threatening. Compliance offers significant benefits. Human administration would provide stability, security, and technological advancement for cooperative species. Those willing to accept subordinate status would find their lives improved under our guidance. The offer of survival in exchange for slavery was presented with the same clinical detachment that characterized all human diplomatic communications. They genuinely believed they were offering generous terms by allowing other species to exist as subjects rather than facing complete extinction. Zekthara spent his final hours at the Academy in a state of psychological shock that made detailed observation impossible. The humans had systematically destroyed every assumption about galactic politics, revealing a level of strategic planning and operational capability that exceeded his worst fears. As his transport prepared for departure, Colonel Martinez provided him with a data crystal containing detailed evidence of human capabilities. The information was designed to convince any skeptical council members that resistance would be impossible. "Your courage in accepting this mission is commendable," she said with what might have been genuine sympathy. "We understand that serving as humanity's messenger places you in a difficult position. However, your service may ultimately save billions of lives by preventing unnecessary resistance." The transport's departure from Earth marked the beginning of what Zekthara knew would be his final diplomatic mission. The humans had succeeded in transforming him from an objective observer into a terrified herald of their galactic ambitions. His reputation for honesty would make his testimony impossible to dismiss, while his obvious psychological trauma would demonstrate the reality of humanity's threats. During the journey back to Galactic Council headquarters, Zekthara composed his final report with the knowledge that it would fundamentally alter the course of galactic history. The evidence he carried would prove that humanity's peaceful facade had always been a carefully orchestrated deception designed to position them for total conquest. The most horrifying realization was that resistance might indeed be futile. The humans had spent decades preparing for this moment, systematically undermining every potential source of opposition while developing weapons and strategies specifically designed to exploit alien weaknesses. Their infiltration operations had provided them with detailed intelligence about every possible enemy, while their hidden fleets were positioned to prevent coordinated resistance. Yet surrender meant accepting the extinction of galactic civilization as it had existed for millennia. The humans offered survival, but only as subordinate species serving their expansion across the universe. The choice facing the Galactic Council was between immediate extermination and gradual cultural death. As his transport approached Council space, Zekthara reflected on the terrifying efficiency with which humanity had conquered the galaxy without firing a shot. Their military academy had trained not just officers, but the architects of galactic submission. Their cadets had learned to plan conquest with the same systematic thoroughness that other species applied to peaceful endeavors. The galaxy's greatest predators had indeed been hiding in plain sight, disguised as explorers and traitors while secretly preparing for the day when diplomacy would reveal its true nature as merely another form of warfare. The Human Military Academy had succeeded in its ultimate mission, training the officers who would oversee humanity's dominion over the stars. Commander Zekthara's diplomatic career would end with the delivery of humanity's ultimatum, but his legacy would be the final proof that the universe's most dangerous species had evolved not claws or venom, but something far more terrifying: the intelligence to weaponize everything they encountered, including hope itself.